State to hang on too much longer in Raqqa. The question does arise, what will happen in the city? And Hassan Hassan is a senior fellow at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy and co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. What does he think?
Syrian Democratic Forces will run Raqqa after they take it. This is still a long way to go. The Americans are expecting the fight in Raqqa to drag for a while. But once the city is retaken, the Syrian Democratic Forces have already established a civil council, like a civilian council, to run the city after it's recaptured from ISIS. And these are the forces that will hopefully run the city after ISIS is driven out.
And remind us who the Syrian Democratic Forces are.
Formed in 2015, late 2015. They included Arab forces alongside the Kurdish YPG militias. They were formed to give more legitimacy and credibility to the US-led coalition in fighting outside Kurdish areas in predominantly Arab towns and cities.
And so you're saying that the Kurds are very much the predominant part of the Syrian Democratic Forces?
They still dominate the Syrian Democratic Forces, not in numbers. The Arabs within the Syrian Democratic Forces make up around 60% of the forces, but the backbone of the Syrian Democratic Forces is really the YPG because they are more organized, they have more experience fighting, they have a better command and control structure. The Arab forces within the SDF still not well trained, and also they lack the robust command and control structure. So they are acting more like militias within the organization, but they're important because they represent demographics that should accept the Syrian Democratic Forces when they fight in places like Raqqa or even potentially Deir ez-Zor, predominantly Arab towns. The Americans thought it was important to include more and more Arabs in the SDF to give them more legitimacy and acceptance in local communities.
Well, exactly. So that gets on to the next question. Will these forces be accepted by the people of Raqqa?
I believe they will be accepted in Raqqa. I have noticed growing positive views towards the Syrian Democratic Forces in areas around Raqqa. I think the main reason is because there's a perception that this is an American project, in the words of a few people I interviewed, meaning it's less Kurdish or less PKK than thought before. This perception changed because there's a growing American footprint inside Syria, and also because the Syrian Democratic Forces started to fight outside Kurdish areas. So it started to look more reflective of the local communities outside predominantly Kurdish areas.
What will the surviving so-called Islamic State forces do?
The next chapter in the fight against ISIS will be mostly in rural areas that ISIS will use as a kind of a backstage for planning, for recruiting, for conducting attacks into urban centers. In fact, this is what ISIS has been doing for a while. If you follow the media output of ISIS, you will notice something that media doesn't report, which is how ISIS does these hit-and-run campaigns in areas we think are liberated and are secure, but they're not. ISIS still conducts these hit-and-run campaigns. But this is kind of a taste of what will happen after ISIS is driven out of Mosul and Raqqa.
And does so-called Islamic State have any popular base? After all this time in power, does it have any support?
In Iraq, I believe ISIS has a stronger popular base than in Syria. Remember that ISIS has been in Syria for only 3 years. It has been in Iraq for well over a decade. That translates into kind of a better understanding of the Iraqi terrain. They understand how to recruit and how to manipulate and exploit sectarian tensions. In Syria, we've noticed that when ISIS is driven out of areas, these areas tend to be calm and quiet, unlike in Iraqi areas. So that tells you that ISIS has a better or kind of deeper understanding of Iraq than Syria, which means they will struggle to maintain their presence inside Syria. The problem, though, in Syria, there's a raging civil war, which also sustains ISIS and other like-minded groups.
Yeah, and just tell us about the tribes, because, some of the tribes in Raqqa, I think, went with so-called Islamic State, and now they'll be faced with a dilemma what to do. How does that work? Do tribes just sort of duck and dive and switch quite easily or not?
Tribes are arguably the oldest institution in the Middle East. They survived ideologies, they survived empires because they are deeply, deeply pragmatic. They take it backstage when there's a dominant force in their areas. They allow the new forces to take their time, especially in the beginning. So there's always a window of opportunity when a new force is in town, in tribal areas, to prove they are different from the previous ruler in that town.
And that analysis from Hassan Hassan. He's a senior fellow at the Tahrir Institute of Middle East Policy, but also the co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. You're listening to the World Service of the BBC. Lots more to come in the programme. This is Owen Bennett-Jones with Newshour.